This is it. She's throwing her hat in the ring. She's jumping into the fray. She's laying her cards down on the table. Guys, she's going head first. Predicting the Women's Prize long list for fiction for 2024. There's always a first on booktube, and this is my first. It's me, Jess. I am here with a very exciting video. Before I launch into my first ever prediction video for the Women's Prize for Fiction for 2024, I would like to just say hello if you are new to my channel, and a special thank you and shout out to Scott at Gunpowder Fiction and Plot, who included me in his video for the third time as a booktuber whose favorite books from 2023 he read. I will link his video down below. Scott is just such a wonderful person, and I feel really honored that he's included me again this year, despite the fact that he did not want to read the book that he had chosen for my list. I think it's just because we had 7 books, I think, in common that we loved, or that we thought very highly of, so it was a little difficult. Scott, it's always, we love the same books, or I love a book and he really doesn't like it. So pretty wide differences when we have differences. Anyhow, hi Scott. Thank you so much for sending some people my way and for saying such lovely things about me and my channel. I also just want to thank everyone who's been with me for a long time, who's watched lots of my videos and liked my videos, and you know I love you guys, and thank you so much for being here. So please bear with me. Oh, and I'd love to introduce my dog. Get introduced himself. Granola, who features sometimes in my videos and makes a lot of annoying noise in the background at times. For the main event, I am going to try to predict the Women's Prize long list for fiction this year. I have never made a video like this before. I don't think I'm very good at making predictions, but I thought I would give it a shot because this year more than ever, I want to be participating in the Women's Prize for Fiction a little bit more actively than I have in the past. So for that reason, I wanted to make a prediction video, and I'd love to see when the announcement is made on March 5th, how many, if any, of these are in. So I'm going to divide the video up between the heavy hitters, the Irish books. I'm Canadian, so I want to include some Canadian selections that I really hope will be on the list. I guess maybe this is sort of a wish list, prediction list. And then just some other books that I think would be, they qualify, they are popular, they're good. Some I've read, some I haven't read. All right, so let's start with the heavy hitters and get those out of the way. Because I think that I have 4 books that I think could potentially be on the list that are on a lot of people's predictions lists. They're hard to ignore. It would be surprising if at least one of these isn't on the list. So this is my way of ensuring that I have at least one. I'll be surprised if at least one of these is not on the list. My heavy hitters are, first off, The Fraud by Zadie Smith. I read The Fraud last year for my book club, and I actually really did enjoy reading The Fraud. I thought it was hilarious. I really became attached to the protagonist, the main character, Mrs. Touchette, or Touche. I could never know how to say her name. And I thought it had a lot to say about the literary world and at that time, it had a lot to say about slavery and white guilt, also about the spectacle of the trial, which the book sort of revolves around. So I really enjoyed it. A lot of people didn't like The Fraud, so mixed reviews on it, but I think it's very possible that Zadie Smith's book will be on the list. The next one that I think will be there is Tom Lake by Ann Patchett. I haven't read Tom Lake yet. It reminds me of like a Chekhov play. I think it's just because it's a cherry farm. I think it's set in a cherry farm, and it's set during the pandemic. So in Tom Lake, 3 sisters return to the cherry orchard, the family orchard in Michigan. They come together and they learn secrets about their mom, about a love affair that she had. That's all I know about the book. I haven't read it. I know that Ann Patchett has a mix of fans and other people who don't quite get along with her, but I'm a big fan, so I would love a reason to read Tom Lake. I've been trying to read it for over a year. I guess I'm not really going to explain why I think these are going to be on the Women's Prize. I feel like I'm not familiar enough with the Women's Prize to really give great insight. And although I have a sense of who the judges are, I haven't really researched extensively their backgrounds. So this is just these are just my predictions based on what little I know about the Women's Prize, that it's books by women written in the English language, so no translations, from April 1st, 2023 to March 31st, 2024. So anything in that time frame. I don't know anything else in terms of the goals of the Women's Prize. I probably should have looked that up before I made this video, but I'm going in a little green this time around. The other big hitter that I think is going to be there that a lot of people have been talking about is Let Us Descend by Jessamine Ward. I haven't read anything by Jessamine Ward. I have Salvage the Bones on my TBR spin stack, and I'm hoping to read that this year. But I have been hearing a lot of people talk quite highly of her and praise especially this new book of hers, which is, I think it's a reclaiming of, so this tells the story of Anis, who is an enslaved girl in the South, and in order for her to survive, she has to, I think she communicates with the ghost of her grandmother. It's a historical fiction that's a retelling of the American slave narrative. It's interesting because this month I'm going to be reading a couple of real slave narratives with a friend. I'll be posting my TBR shortly. Anyway, that aside, Let Us Descend tells the story of Anis. She is the narrator of the story. She struggles through her experience as a slave, and she turns inward and seeks comfort from memories of her mother and stories of her African warrior grandmother. And I think that the supernatural element is that she ends up talking to the ghost of her grandmother. It sounds really, really good, and I'm sure that I would love to read it. Hope it does make the list. I think it would be a good selection by the jury. And then, of course, Julia. Can't forget to discuss Julia. I think that it would be shocking if Julia is not on the list. Lots of people have talked about Julia around booktube. I haven't read it yet. I did pass by it in my library yesterday, and I did almost take it out. But for those of you who don't know, who are new to my channel, I am judging the booktube prize octo finals round. I'll leave a video in the description box below. So I do have quite a bit on my reading list at the moment. I do really want to read Julia. It's a retelling of 1984 from a feminist perspective, and I think it'll be fantastic, and I've heard really wonderful things about it. My idea was to read it in a vlog and reread 1984, which I haven't read since I was in high school. If it goes on the list, I'm definitely going to do that as my reading vlog for this spring. Promises. She's making promises. Those are the heavy hitters on my list. Now we'll talk about Irish first, because I do think that I think that my Canadian selections probably longer, they have a longer shot, like they're less likely. The Irish books that I think might be on the long list. First is The Wren by Anne Enright. I haven't read anything by her, and in some ways I could have included this in my list of heavy hitters because Anne Enright is an established author, very well respected. And The Wren is a new release from her about a relationship between a mother and daughter. So I think that it has the right ingredients for the Women's Prize. I would really like to read it as well. I'm not going to talk about who's been nominated before until I get into the Canadian books. I guess, like I said, some of this is a wish list of books that I've already read that I loved and books that I really want to read. So keep that in mind. I just finished reading The Rachel Incident by Caroline O'Donoghue. I loved it so much. I thought it was so good. I'll talk more about it in a coming up in a wrap up. It's the story of Rachel and her friend James and her boyfriend James and a professor, and it does deal with the sort of the modern the life of a young woman. So Rachel is a student, she's working in a bookstore, and that's where she meets James, and they become like best friends and they move in together. And then there is a professor, married professor, Dr. Fred Byrne, who plays a really important role in their lives. So it's about love, it's about being a young woman at the beginning of your career, and just the sort of the professional problems that you can face, the relationship entanglements. I thought it was really good. I hope it makes the list. Those Irish writers, I'm telling you. The next one I think will be there is Soldier Sailor by Claire Kilroy. I had talked about it in a previous video because I make these videos about the Globe and Mail, which is Canadian's national newspaper, the list that they put out about the best books of the year so far, or the books to look out for. And I did talk about Soldier Sailor in one of those lists. It was highlighted and it really piqued my interest. It's dark. I think it's about a new mother's experiences, and it's written in an experimental format where she's writing a letter to her son. Yeah, so it's really about early motherhood and got a lot of dark undertones from what I've heard. So again, I think that's something that the Women's Prize might recognize. Finally, in terms of Irish, and I had a little bit of a hard time cutting out Irish authors from this list, I gotta say. The other one that I hope is on the list that I really want to read, that was recognized, I think, recently in the new book awards, the Nero Book Awards, I believe, is Ordinary Human Failings by Megan Nolan. This sounds so good. It might be outside of the scope of what the Women's Prize would normally have on their long list, but I'd love to see it there. I definitely want to read it. It's set mostly in the 90s, and it tells the story of the Greens, a family of Irish immigrants who have moved to London in the hope of escaping the social stigma of their daughter Caramel's teenage pregnancy and her brother Richie's escalating alcoholism. And I think it's supposed to be really good because it's set in the early 1990s. It really explores the culture of the time, especially the tabloid culture of the time. And I think that that will make it a really interesting read. It's also about addiction and alcoholism. It might be too much for the Women's Prize. I'm not sure. We'll see. We'll see. But I definitely want to read it. Okay, so that's it for my Irish picks. Now we'll get into the Canadians. So the first two I'll talk about are two that I'm not sure whether they qualify or not for two different reasons. The first one is A Study for Obedience by Sarah Bernstein. In preparation for this, I had to Google how many words in A Study for Obedience, because Women's Prize has a minimum word count requirement, and it's 30,000 words. And when I Googled Study for Obedience's word length, it was 36,000 words. So I'm going with it. I'm gonna say Study for Obedience by Sarah Bernstein. Study for Obedience won the Giller Prize last year. It's a remarkable book. It's not for everyone. It's a story with an unnamed narrator who moves to a remote town in the north, and she goes to take care of her brother. But really what the story is exploring, and she's an outsider in this town, and her experiences as an outsider are revealed through various different stories. But the story is really about obedience and explores the concept of obedience in society and obedience by women. And it's just a really interesting book. It doesn't have, it's not a typical book with a story, and it's not especially commercial. It's more literary than commercial. So for that reason, maybe it won't be there. I think there's a good possibility that, or I hope there's a possibility that Study of Obedience could be on the list. The other Canadian book that I think, now this one is a little bit confounding. I'm not sure if it qualifies. The Sleeping Car Porter by Suzette Mayer. Now, the reason why I'm putting this on the list is because I think it was recently published in, or it was published in the UK within the time frame of eligibility criteria. So I am adding it to my list because, again, Giller Prize winner in 2022. The Sleeping Car Porter's publication date in the UK was the 18th of May, 2023. So that makes it eligible for this year's Women's Prize. And I think there's a good chance that it could be on the long list. When I read it back when it won the Giller Prize, I talked about it on my channel. And I think that it's a really unique book in that not only the topic of telling the story of Baxter, our protagonist, who is a porter on a train, an overnight train going across Canada in 1929. He's aspiring to go to school to become a dentist. He considers himself lucky enough to have this job on this train. And what Suzette Meyer does really well is that she really writes it in such a way that you come to really understand just how oppressive the job is and how difficult the job is. In addition, there is a queer angle to the story, which was really well done. So yeah, it has a lot of interesting themes, and I think that it's unique. And it's a unique story that that it just doesn't, there isn't anything like this around. So I think it would be really cool if it made the list. The other one that I think could be there from Canada is Sheila Heti's book. She was actually nominated for the Women's Prize for Fiction back in 2013 for How Should a Person Be? I've not read anything by Sheila Heti, but she does have a new book out called Alphabetical Diaries. I talked about it in a recent video of books that are coming up that are being published in 2024 to look out for. And she had a really experimental way of writing this novel. She had tracked a record of her thoughts over a 10-year period in Excel and then like listed those from A to Z and used those themes to then write the novel. So I do think that because it's a bit experimental and because she's been recognized by the Women's Prize before, that Alphabetical Diaries stands maybe an outside chance of making it on the list. And then my last Canadian choice is The Driver's Waiting by Priya Guns. I haven't read this one yet, but Scott has praised this book, Lindy has praised this book, and I do think that if the long list is looking for something from sort of a representation of queer representation, race representation of a younger generation, and the way that they are possibly, like I haven't read it yet, but the way that they are approaching some of the societal issues, I think those are all provided in this book, at least from the way that I've heard it spoken about. The story follows Damani, whose father has just died while working in a fast food restaurant, and she's poor, so she's living paycheck to paycheck in a basement apartment. She's caring for her mom and driving for an app that's constantly cutting her take. It's about a relationship that she has with a white woman. I think it really does explore the concept of white allyship because she does get into a relationship with this white woman. And I just think that it would be so amazing if this was on the long list. So as I said, part wish list, part prediction list. So those are my four Canadian choices. Now we'll get into some of the other books that I think are quite possibly going to be there, that are UK publications or American publications. So the next one I'm gonna predict is Lauren Groff's The Vaster Wilds. I'm actually reading this for the BookTube prize. As I mentioned, I'm judging for the octofinals, and this is in my category, or my grouping. I read The Matrix last year and really, really liked it. So I think that The Vaster Wilds stands a good chance, potentially, of being on the list. This is, I think, it's a coming of age story about, she's a servant girl who escapes from a colonial settlement into the night. She has nothing with her, and it's about how she survives in the wild. That's what I know about it. It's an adventure story, and I think that it could potentially be on the list. I'm excited at the possibility that it might be. Lauren Groff was a discovery for me last year, and I really, really like her writing. Next prediction is Enter Ghost by Isabella Ahmad. I don't know if the Women's Prize will touch something that's perhaps a little bit political, but I've heard nothing but amazing things about this book, and I really want to read it. It's about a woman who has been away from Palestine for many years and is returning to Haifa to visit her older sister, Haneen. So her sister Haneen had made a life for herself there, commuting to Tel Aviv to teach at the university, and Sonia remained in London to focus on her acting career, and now her marriage has fallen apart, and so she's returned returning, and she's exploring her relationship to Palestine upon her return. She gets roped into performing in a production of Hamlet in the West Bank. I just think it's supposed to be a really beautiful rendering of present-day Palestine, obviously before the war broke out, but I think it's a possibility, and I'm definitely planning to read it this year. Okay, so now we're getting into some books where I just don't know. These are just really outside predictions, these last two. Potentially. First one, I don't know if it's going to be on the list, but I really want to read it, and I think it qualifies, so it's going on my predictions. It's probably not going to be on the list, but it'd be cool if it was. I just want it to be a little different, and I haven't seen this on anybody else's list, and I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but here we go. August Blue by Deborah Levy. This has gotten a lot of praise as well, and I don't know if Deborah Levy has been nominated before or not. I didn't check. But this story is also, I think, Women's Prize material. It's about a woman who is at the height of her career, and she's like a piano virtuoso. She was a child prodigy, and she just walks off the stage and walks out of her life in the middle of a performance. So that's a cool opening. And then she goes to Athens, and there's a doppelganger. She has a doppelganger. And so it's a doppelganger story as well as an escape adventure story. I don't know about adventure, but she does journey across Europe, and she's shadowed by this woman who is like her doppelganger. I think it could be a really interesting read. I definitely want to read it. It could be on the Women's Prize long list. You never know. So perhaps, maybe perhaps. And I know that a lot of people have picked a lot of books that I haven't added on my list, but that's the fun of it, right? So now I have like this long list of other ones that I could have included that I've been hearing people talk about. I could have talked about Land of Milk and Honey. I could have talked about The Storm We Made, which a lot of people are talking about. I wanted to possibly put Abolitions on my list, but no, I'm going with Night Bloom by Peace Medier. Night Bloom is about two sisters who were very close when they were young, and now they've grown apart. It's set in Ghana, and it's supposed to be a riveting depiction of class and family in Ghana, a compelling exploration of memory, and an eye-opening story of life as an African-born woman in the United States. Don't know if it'll be on the long list, potentially not, but I really want to read Night Bloom, and it's possible that it could be on there. Those are my predictions and my wish list. There are a lot of other books that I could have talked about, but you have to whittle it down to 16, and that's what I've done. And you have to commit to your predictions list, which I've done. All things that make me very uncomfortable, but it's okay because it's going to be so fun when I compare the actual long list to my predictions list and I see that I don't know how to do it. I don't know how to predict. It's going to be so fun to fail in my predictions. I'm really looking forward to it. No, it'll be so fun to see what's on the long list. Almost every time, and I haven't been participating for that long, but usually there are quite a few books that, or at least half the list are books that I've never heard of before. So I'm really looking forward to the Women's Prize long list when it comes out next week. And I will be filming a reaction to the long list, and we can talk about my predictions and how many I got right and how many I got wrong. It'll be so much fun. Let me know in the comments below if you've read any of these books, if you have any other choices for the long list. I've not watched very many booktuber videos, but I know there's a lot of them out there, and so I'm gonna have a lot of fun watching everyone's videos and seeing what they're saying, what they're predicting. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video. Bye for now. You have to whittle it down to 12. No. I thought I was falling asleep. Ow. So wait, how many have I done? Oh, 12. I've done 12. The Canadian, should we talk about Canadian or Irish first? Okay. She's doing it. She's making her predictions. She's throwing her hat in the ring. She's jumping into the fray. She is laying her cards on the table. Guys, it's like she's jumping into the ocean without a life vest. Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. Oh. Can I have my coffee in peace? Merci.